Charlie Smith, Jongbanji, Georgia Strait. I'm Charlie Smith, editor of the Georgia Strait. And I'm going to talk about two subjects this week, energy and climate change. Starting with climate change, this week in the Georgia Strait we have an article by Daniel Seghe about refugees from global warming. And this is a topic that hasn't generated a lot of discussion in this region. There's a Society for Bangladesh Climate Justice. Dr. Mohammed Zaman is the executive director, and it's trying to draw attention to what the consequences are of rising greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And we've already seen some horrific extreme weather events in recent years. Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. We've seen Superstorm Sandy, which devastated the eastern seaboard of the United States right before the 2012 presidential election, running all the way from Haiti to Canada, this massive storm. We had Typhoon Haiyan this year in the Philippines. We've had terrible rainfall and storms in southern China, northern India. We've had fires in Australia. So basically what we're seeing is the effect of climate change in some of these cases. You can't point to each individual one and say it's caused by climate change, but clearly the effects are magnified by the storm surge. And what happens with the storm surge is you get seawater often coming up onto fertile ground. And if you look in southern China or in India, in the Philippines, where you grow rice, what happens is the salt water, the salination, affects the soil and also affects the rice crops, particularly when they're young. So what we're going to see, as Daniel suggests, is some increasing problems with food. And you can see it in Africa as well, where Daniel is from. He's actually was born in Sudan and moved to Canada when he was 3 years old. So he's looking at what the likelihood is of mass migration. And one of the greatest migrations that's expected to occur in the coming years is escaping Bangladesh. And a lot of those people may end up in India, but some of them may want to come to Canada. So he was looking at whether Canada is going to be a destination for more climate refugees and steps that Canada should be taking. And it's interesting because we had a glimpse of this with Sri Lankan refugees coming here on a boat and then immediately being impounded, arrested, taken into custody. And he was suggesting in his article that maybe we need to have a more humane approach as we go forward. One of the examples of climate refugees that we're seeing right now is in the Mediterranean, where Africans are trying to get to Europe. They're taking enormous risks, and in some cases their boats are sinking, and it's been a terrible tragedy. Another story we had this week concerned the Northern Gateway Pipeline, which was given kind of conditional approval by the Joint Review Panel. And this is the pipeline that would run from the Alberta tar sands to Kitimat. Enbridge is the proponent of it. And so Carlito Pablo, one of our reporters, interviewed Jeff Rubin. And Jeff Rubin is the former chief economist of CIBC. And he's also the author of this book, The End of Growth, which looks at the oil industry. And Jeff Rubin was looking at Stephen Harper's forecasts of Canada becoming an energy superpower by 2030. And there's talk of Canada producing 6 million barrels of oil a day, which would put us on par with major oil producers like Russia. And he was suggesting that if we get to that point, we're probably going to need about 5 pipelines, new pipelines in Canada. We've already got the Northern Gateway Pipeline proposed. There's a Kinder Morgan pipeline. There's another pipeline that is being proposed to go across Canada to the Maritimes. And another pipeline, the Keystone XL, is being proposed to go into the United States. The problem, as Jeff Rubin points out, is that they all are surrounded with all sorts of political controversies. And that raises questions whether all these pipelines will be built. And that makes things challenging for people who want to produce oil from the bitumen in the tar sands, because how much production can you do? Because you don't want the production to be locked in. And this is a time of the year when there isn't a lot of news kind of in the traditional news cycle, but it is a time when a lot of people have time to read books. So I was going to make a couple of recommendations right now. I'll start with this book by Brad Levine, and it's called Building the Orange Wave, and it's about how Jack Layton, the former NDP leader, took the party from just a terrible situation. It won 13 seats in the 2000 election, and he was a Toronto City Councillor. He decided to seek the leadership in 2002, became the leader in 2003, and helped the party grow to the point where it has more than 100 seats in Parliament and is the official opposition. And as many of us know, Jack Layton was struck with cancer, first prostate cancer, and then a second form of cancer that eventually caused his death in 2011. The author, Brad Levine, worked very closely with Jack Layton right from the beginning. And he was at one point Jack Layton's kind of senior advisor, and then later he became the campaign director in 2011. And what comes through in the book is what a canny tactician Jack Layton was. And he was always using his mind and how he built the party in Quebec. But he also had some disappointments along the line. When he first came in, people thought that he may not have a lot of success. His first chief of staff, Rick Smith, came from the animal welfare movement, and there was a caucus revolt. And then shortly after that, Sven Robinson, the former MP for Burnaby Douglas, was caught stealing a ring, and Jack Layton was faced with the embarrassment of that. They went into the 2004 election, and he had high hopes of increasing the seat count, but they only went from 13 to 19, even though they increased their percentage of the popular vote. Part of the reason was Jack Layton had a platform that was full of promises, but one in particular was for an inheritance tax. An inheritance tax isn't that unusual in many parts of the world, but his opponents exploited that by calling it a death tax, and that he was going to tax the dying, and it hurt the NDP in the 2004 election, so that promise never came forward again. In 2006, the Liberals were suffering because of the sponsorship scandal. It was another election, and what Jack Layton did, as Brad Levine points out, was he quite cleverly asked Canadians to lend him their vote, because he knew a lot of them liked the Liberal Party, but they didn't like what was happening within the Liberal Party because there was a huge scandal in Quebec involving federal dollars going to ad agencies that actually ended up in the pockets of the Liberal Party. So he said, lend us your vote. The seat count went up significantly, and his wife Olivia Chow was elected in Toronto. And then in 2008, he made an audacious move. He said that he was going to run to be prime minister, even though he was, the fourth party in Parliament. And some people questioned that. Some people ridiculed him. But he did reasonably well and continued the growth. And then the big breakthrough came in 2011 when we basically saw the collapse of the Liberal Party under Michael Ignatieff. So Brad Levine was an insider. It's a very positive book about Jack Layton. You won't hear a lot of negative things written by his close friend, but at the same time, it offered some deep insights into federal politics and how Jack Layton spent years laying a foundation to get that big breakthrough in Quebec. It didn't happen by fluke. It happened because of some tactics and a lot of thought, a lot of hard work. And Jack Layton remains, a very potent figure in the minds of many New Democrats, as his successor, Tom Mulcair, tries to emulate what Layton achieved, although the election of Justin Trudeau as leader of the Liberal Party has raised some speculation that maybe the NDP's breakthrough in 2011 may not hold in 2015. The next book I'm going to discuss is by a local writer, Charles Montgomery, and it is called Happy City, Transforming Our Lives Through Urban Design. And it's a fantastic book, and what it does is it looks at the design of cities and how that's linked to people's happiness. And he takes a good look at the effect of commuting on people's well-being, how to make cities more friendly to cyclists, to transit. There's many examples from Vancouver where he talks about some of the strategies to make Vancouver more livable, and also some of the concerns that as Vancouver has become quite a beautiful city, it also has some issues of affordability. And one of the components of a happy city is a city where people of different incomes can live comfortably and happily. And it's pretty hard to in Vancouver at times for many people just because of the cost of living. The third book I'm going to mention, and it's by a Harvard academic, Thomas Patterson, and it's called Informing the News, the Need for More Knowledge-Based Journalism. And I think he has really cottoned on to an important point, that journalism these days is not doing a great job of informing the public, and the consequences are that it's having a detrimental effect on our democracy. And he points to the invasion of Iraq in 2003 by a coalition led by the United States. What happened at that time was 2/3 of the viewers of Fox News believed that Saddam Hussein, the then dictator of Iraq, was in cahoots with Al-Qaeda, which was just blatantly false, that Al-Qaeda had no use for Saddam Hussein, and they were actually mortal enemies. So he goes through some of the challenges of the journalists not being well educated enough, the citizenry not being well educated enough, that we're almost creating these cyber ghettos on the internet in which people will gravitate to the points of view that they agree with. One of the causes of kind of the decline of news, particularly in the United States, was the elimination of the fairness doctrine in 1987 by the Reagan administration. And this was a rule that required broadcasters to try to achieve some sort of semblance of balance. So once that was struck, you saw the rise of these right-wing talk shows, Glenn Beck, Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, and this very inflammatory kind of infotainment. And so Thomas Patterson's taken a look at this and is deeply concerned. And I think some of what he's saying spills over into Canada. Although we haven't eliminated the fairness doctrine in Canada, it operates under a different format in Canada. The broadcast media are regulated by the Canadian Radio, Television, and Telecommunications Commission. So we don't have the same level of kind of extreme media polemics, basically, that you see in the United States. But his book is worth reading, and particularly for people who work in journalism instructors, and people interested in politics and current affairs.